Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. For those watching on video today, I grazed my eye with a piece of clothing, and so my eye got all red. So, hence the sunglasses. I don't normally wear sunglasses indoors. Anyway, I guess maybe I could start though. Huh? Anyway, uh, folks, let me preface before we get started. Oftentimes we jump in talking about organizational culture because that's where we come together and meet up as teams, hopefully, to work together for a common goal of serving our customers. But as we know, we serve customers in our own lives well beyond end users of product and service, within our community, our families, our friends, and so on and so forth. All dots connect, right, folks? So as we jump in, use the information to build and enhance your life to be better and more thriving. That should hopefully be the point. And by doing so, then we replicate, good things in the world, and that's how culture can transform for the better, right? It's just constancy over time, folks. Really, if you really boil it down. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology of making it worse. Now, a lot of things may come through your mind, pictures in your own mind potentially. The psychology of making it worse. Now, just think for a second. I'll take 2 seconds, quiet time. 2 seconds to think of a scenario where either you or someone you know made something worse. Okay, you probably didn't need all that much time, right? I know I've been guilty of it. We've all done it, folks. We've all made something worse, whether intentionally or otherwise, and maybe even subconsciously, right? We've probably made some things worse. If if you're a dude, especially if you're a dude in a relationship, and you don't get the laundry in the laundry basket, or you don't actually take the garbage out, or you're not doing all the little things, right? A lot of those little things can add up, can make it worse, right? Those are some obvious no-brainers, right? But that could be any one of us not doing something, right? But the psychology of making it worse, I think, is less about absent-mindedness, right? I'm going to bail us all out with that, right? Yes, we can be absent-minded. I know for myself, I have kind of a absent-minded professor way about me at times for myself. I might have working on three things at once. Okay, and so we can get into those ruts. But this is more leaning into a little bit more overt, making it worse, and a lot of times making it worse for ourselves, or if others making it worse for themselves. It isn't necessarily making it worse for somebody else on purpose, necessarily, right? But that can often happen, right? And so you have to ask yourself, well, why does this occur? And we'll get to the why, but let's frame it from this perspective. You're at your work site, doesn't matter what job you do, really just doesn't matter. And you and your team were doing a project, and you got it done, right? And then you wanted like a minute or two to celebrate the win and go, hey, that was fantastic, and whatever, and you didn't even really get that much of a thought, maybe. And here came the wet blanket to come in and go, well, that's great that we got that done, but you know what? This is still messed up. Wham. And they hit you with moving the goalposts, right? That whole moving the goalposts, right, happens way more than we would admit to ourselves, right? And we can all fall into this trap, folks, because we can be very goal oriented. We have objectives to achieve, to get, and it may be what we did was great, and maybe it is just an incremental piece of the puzzle. But you got to remember, folks, we have to celebrate the wins. It doesn't mean we have to stop and throw a week-long party fest, but we do need to acknowledge, right, folks, and acknowledge, breakthrough. really, because sometimes that, those, remember, it's an accumulation of breakthrough that is going to transform your organization, transform culture, community, all of these things, right? It is a constancy over time. But we can also be our worst enemy, right? We can imagine a myriad of scenarios like I just talked about, where it's a project. But it could also be, it could be milestones, right? It could be you achieve something more than just, say, a project, but maybe it's a quarterly thing or a semi-annual, annual, whatever goal, right? Target or goal, whatever. And that's your and that should be something that should be acknowledged and appreciated and valued, right? And again, it isn't always one person either. Keep that in mind. It could be a whole group of people, It could be the corporate office never lets the sites, if you have multiple, sites, right? Numerous sites, and you have one corporate office somewhere, that they never really let the sites kind of revel in their success, right? They never really let them kind of have their moment in the sun, right? And why? A big piece of this is being removed, to be physically removed, right? Removed by distance and so on, and or time, right? So it could be that if, the broader leadership isn't visiting sites, right? Or checking up with sites or communicating well enough, this is going to bleed through, right? So the psychology of making it worse isn't really, well, the corporate office wanted to make it worse, but it doesn't matter if they wanted to or not, they did, right? And this is kind of the point. They made it worse. They made it worse in their approach. The approach was worse. And this isn't to say that all corporate entities are bad or anything like that. I'm using that as an example. This is clearly, this has occurred. I've seen it. You've seen it. Everybody's seen it. Okay. This could be site leadership, right? This could be the broader team, right? The broader team could be such go-getters that they don't want to slow down to acknowledge some of their own success, right? And their own achievements. So there's that addictive nature of what we do, right? And we can get it stuck in this spin cycle, right? And I guess the psychology of making it worse is you never allow yourself to enjoy the fruits of the accomplishment. From a work standpoint, we can see this. This is pretty segmented. We can kind of see when this is happening, right? But now go out into culture, right? Let's, look at family. You could have a scenario where, let's say, there are factions of a family who haven't gotten along because of X, Y, or Z, right? And maybe somebody shows contrition and, olive branches a situation and says, oh, this and that, shows contrition, whatever the case may be. And there begins healing. But because perhaps that the wounds have also entered into others in the family, others don't want to see that a peace to be achieved, right? And so what do? They kind of sabotage it by bringing more to the table. Isn't necessarily they brought that they were focused on that particular thing, but now maybe they create strife in other situations, right? You see some of this played out in dramatic ways, movies and TV, right? Where, the offspring of the battling parents or grandparents or whatever the case may be, the offspring now have imbibed this hatred or this dislike or this vitriol, and now they've kept it alive in their own way, right? You see this in some of the holiday movies too, where people come home for the holidays and then they're kind of at each other's throats, right? So you kind of see it in that as well. Unresolved conflicts now are front and center, right? And kept alive, right? And why is this? You kind of have to ask yourself, this would apply whether we're talking about families, and this could be friend groups too, families, friends, community, work. You have to ask yourself, why wouldn't you just take the time to enjoy the peace and the and the success, right? And this is where we kind of jump into the layers a little bit and say, well, what's achieved, or what's the harm in just enjoying the success or the peace or the the milestone? Well, because if our identity has been so wrapped around, right, our identity and maybe our purpose has been wrapped around the war, that we don't really know how to be, to live in a world where there's no war, okay? Where there's no, people button heads, right? Whether personally or professionally, people button heads. I've seen family members, they've been button heads forever and a day. And then finally, some things get resolved. And then you start to see some of those same people kind of spark out into other arenas, to butt heads with other people, right? Instead of being to see, to see the development and all of that they have achieved, and to sit quietly and just let that wash over, let that phase of life go, so that they can now, the personality and the person that they've become now has now become a new person, right? It's difficult to have a rebirth in a situation, personally, professionally, community wise, to have any kind of or business wise, right? To have a rebirth, if you're not able to acknowledge the lesson, acknowledge the journey, acknowledge, put things to rest, and then take a breath, enjoy the peace, enjoy the moment, and then let it go, right? And then what? Because the new identity is going to require a little bit of that quiet and that silence, right? Your old identity was wrapped up. Your old purpose and identity was wrapped up in vitriol, in the combat, in the war, and the difficulty and the strife. But for you to get to the new identity, you're going to have to put all that to rest. Now, you can see this in culture. You can see this on the global scale, right? You have to ask yourself, okay, you get everything you want for Christmas. Are you happy now? Right? Really, it doesn't matter if we're talking about a person, a community, a country, the powers that be. You get everything you want. Are you happy now? Can you sit quiet and be happy and satisfied? Or do you have to have more? Do you have to hurt? Right? Do you have to, psychology of making it worse? Do you have to keep making things worse? Right? To prove that you're, to basically, reinforce your identity, that identity of old. Look, folks, for our culture to move forward in a healthy way, right? For us to become the shining city on the hill, as a world, okay? For us to get there, we have to actually visually, mentally, emotionally, all of it, acknowledge that for us to move into that realm, we have to let this go. We have to acknowledge that we need the material, ego materials required to survive and to grow crops and to do all the functional things we have to do. That's where your ego is required. But it isn't required to throw, logs on the fire of division and distrust and harm, right? So whether we're talking about an organization, a personal life, culture, and community-wide or broader culture, we have to acknowledge that our identity has been wrapped around conflict and divisiveness. And for us to get to that shining city on the hill, we have to take that backpack of vitriol and and the inner need to make things worse, right? That has been masking who we are actually. Who are you actually, right? Who are you actually? You're not going to be able, first of all, until what? Until we're like little children, we're not going to be able to ascend that up to that shining city on the hill. We can't, and little children can't carry that big backpack of vitriol, right? And hate, distrust, and our drive to make it worse. Even if we don't think we're consciously doing it, we're subconsciously buying into the whole narrative, right? And we have been for generations, every single one of us, folks. There isn't a person that hasn't done it, period, dot. Okay? Every single person, myself included, right? This is a journey, right? Part of the awakening is awakening to the fact that our lives have been wrapped around the drama and even to the extent that our media, entertainment and everything else. Yeah, there's dramatic things, right, that we watch for movies and TV or whatever, this and that. But and we're entertained by that, but we don't need to emulate that, right? We don't need to copy that. There isn't a need for all of that, you know. And for us to get to that shining city on the hill, we're going to have to consciously recognize that we have been subconsciously feeding an insatiable lion of division within our hearts. And when we have that awareness, when we have that awakening, now you can be friends with people you weren't friends with, right? You let all that go. You rise way above that, right? There isn't a need to hate. There isn't a need for concern. There isn't a need for divisiveness, right? Our identity that we may have wrapped around conflict with other people and situations, all the way down to our progress at work, right? This is just a manifestation. This is an arena where we've manifested the whole paradigm, right, of the psychology of making it worse. We have to flip the script now into the psychology of what? Wanting to transform to the better, to the greater, to the, to the more positive, whatever you want to call it. You label it how you want. I'm not here to create the mantra or whatever. I'm only here to point out what I feel is maybe something that you only discover when you do slow down and you let that silence wash over you so that you can see what's going on in families, in communities, in the culture, right? In the world, all of it. And then you'll come to the same conclusion, right? You've been wasting your time in conflict with people that nothing is ever going to come from that. Let it go. There's no need. Put it down, Put down the conflict. Put down all of the strife and the struggle. Enjoy the blessings that you have. Build bridges. Let's build the world the way we want it to be. Not focused on what we don't have, right? This is part of the problem. It's materialistic. It's what I don't have and this and that. Look, folks, we're all renters here, okay? We're all renters here. This is temporary. We're all renters here, okay? So, of course, we want to have the mindset of renters who are treating our blessings like we would as if we owned it, right? If it's not ours, we still need to take care of it, right? This is the whole, even in our work environments, right? Hopefully, we're treating our resources appropriately. Why? Because it matters to the customer, right? In the end, it does. Because every minute you're wasting having to backtrack and double this and double that and redo this and redo that for customers, right? It's costing the customer more money, right? It's costing, and it's wasting your time. You're not productive. So you're stressing out. And then when you do achieve something, somebody's going to throw something right in front of you again, right? Now, this can happen, folks. Hey, we're not there yet. It never really ends because we're always serving customers, right? There's a bit of a perpetual nature to that, but that's kind of life, right? That's perpetually moving forward, generation after generation. So with that in mind, that should even be more of a reason. If you truly care about the next generations, and I mean truly, I don't mean you're using it like a political poster, right? just to go, well, it's for, our children and our grandchildren. No, no, no. Really care. Really care. Okay. If you really care, then you're going to let some of that stuff go. You're not going to have a posture of divisiveness. You're going to have a posture of peace and growth, period. You just are. Otherwise, you're misrepresenting your manifestos, your constitutions, your faith, because your faith calls it out too, right? You're not loving your neighbor as yourself, right? You're in contradiction in a constantly, right? Slow down, take stock, take a breath, don't overjudge. We've all done it, folks. We've all fallen into the psychology of making it worse. Could be relationships, right? Relationships that could have been mended that we, ended. Ones that, and vice versa, whatever. But, all kinds of things that go into this potpourri of life. And we've learned, right? And that's okay. We can look back and we can say, look, our culture and us as individuals and the generations before us and all of our cultures have gone through this, evolution of growth, right? And it has been positive and ugly, right? Positive and ugly. It's not been a perfect, walk, but it has been a fantastic classroom for us to realize what has occurred. It's only if we don't realize that we need to plateau this thing and then allow our identities now to become that of what? More loving, more kind, more unifying, right? Hopeful, right? Merciful, right? Beatitudes, insert here, okay? So, anyway, just to talk a little bit today, folks, about the psychology of making it worse. Now, flip the script. Flip the script. When you wake up tomorrow, put your feet on the ground. The psychology of making it all better. Okay? Focus on what can I do to make it better. I say, just like I say in the book, we're here to protect love. If you need a purpose, if you're short of a purpose and you're not sure, it's like, well, how do I transition from all the garbage that's been going on to the future? We are here to protect love. If you set out on that journey to protect love for yourself and the love of others and others' sovereignty to love as well, then all will go well. It just will. There's no other way around it. And caveat, though, is the only way it can fail is if you're still living in the old paradigm. If you're still trying to keep the old divisiveness and all the, it's like going to a tennis match, folks. We've gone to a tennis match. The tennis players are at war with each other, but they're getting paid very well, okay? Because we're paying high ticket prices to be entertained by this conflict, by this competition. That's what we have sports for. Great. But in the rest of the of culture, right? A lot of this is life and death. It's serious stuff, folks. It's not just businesses making money and competing that way. It's life and death for many folks. And it's time that we, let's just make the competition about our sports. Let's keep the competition there. And let's make the rest of it about empowering and supporting and growing and evolving not only our physical health and all the rest of it, but our spiritual, our emotional, right, intellectual, all of that. We can learn so much more. And there's some fantastic breakthroughs that are coming out now. We need to ride that wave instead of allowing that old paradigm of conflict and contrast to pepper into our experience. It's unnecessary and it's unneeded. So, all right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for today. Hopefully you're having a fantastic day. Remember to hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When you do that, not only are you helping to transform culture, but you're transforming your own life. But don't forget, we can't transform anything on the outside. We're not willing to transform on the inside. This is so important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.